I said earlier today, and I want to thank you so much for your remarkable generosity. In a couple weeks, we're going to get the chance to celebrate not just what we've been able to give as a church, but we've been able to give and the hours we've been able to serve, as well as the things we've been able to do, like loving our community through birthday bags and birthday parties in a bag. But I want to thank you so much. Your generosity means the world to me. I made the comment a few weeks ago that my dream, I want our contribution as a local church to be one that genuinely we are a necessary part of our community. And what you did last week and what we get the chance to do this week and what we get to do next week, it stamps that reality into our community. And I want to say thank you. Now, I might be naive in thinking this, but I genuinely think that everybody in America should have a favorable opinion of Christians. I genuinely think that everybody in our country should think that Christians are the greatest people in the world. Now you're sitting there thinking, have you watched the news? Scott, yeah, that's so way out there. There's no way that could be a reality. But the reason I believe that, the reason I think that should be true is because Jesus was quite possibly the greatest person to ever walk the face of this earth. And as followers of Jesus, our mission is to look more and more and more like Jesus with every single day we live. And as a follower of Jesus, if I am looking more and more and more like Jesus in the world around me, they should be more and more compelled to say, what is it about you that's different? I want some of that. But we scoffed and we kind of laughed at this idea that Christians would even be favorably thought of in our community today. And that's why we do Be Rich. We do Be Rich because it's our opportunity corporately to do what I believe we as individuals should be doing year-round. We do Be Rich because it's an opportunity for us to showcase the love and the generosity of an incredible God to our community. It's an opportunity for us to do what Jesus showcased as he walked the face of this earth. And so what we do with Be Rich, it's this idea that we want to give and we want to serve and we want to love. And the reason we want to do it is simple. It's because we genuinely believe that every single person matters to God, regardless of if God matters to them or not. That everybody matters to God, regardless of your story, regardless of your background, regardless of who you are or what you've done in your life, that you matter to God, regardless of if God matters to you or not. And we get this idea, it's kind of crazy, maybe a little zany, but we get this idea from John 3:16. It's a verse that many of you know, but John is documenting a conversation between Jesus and this guy named Nicodemus. And in the midst of the conversation, John denotes what Jesus said. He looks at Nicodemus and he says, "For God so loved the world," and then he did not put any qualifications. He didn't say, "For God so loved the world." He didn't say, "For God so loved everybody that acts like," and then began putting a bunch of moral standards. He didn't say, "For God so loved everybody," and then began putting socioeconomic standards, began putting racial standards. He simply said, "For God so loved the world." No qualifications. God loved, so he did what only somebody that loves would do. He gave. God loved, God gave. And that's the heart of generosity is found in the fact that Jesus gave of himself for us. And so during this season, what we're going to do is we are going to focus our ideas, focus our reality, focus our corporate gatherings, if you will, around what can we do to leverage our reality to be more like Jesus. Because if everybody matters to God, then I believe everybody should matter to us. And we get this idea for Be Rich. It came from Paul was writing to his protege, to somebody that he entrusted to lead a local church that he had started. Timothy was a young gun. He was a guy that Paul saw incredible value in. And there's a few different accounts that Paul is writing letters to Timothy. And one of those letters, he writes this, and this is kind of our marching orders for this idea of Be Rich. He says, command those who are rich in this present world. And last week, we looked at this idea that regardless of where we land, the majority of us in here could be considered by worldly standards as filthy rich. And I'm just going to lay that there if you want to podcast and see, now, how did you get that? But the reality is, command those who are rich in this present world to do good. And there's our title, to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and to be willing to share. That we should be rich in good deeds and we should be generous and willing to share. That we should be willing to serve, to leverage our good deeds to the benefit of others. We should be willing to be generous with the resources that we have. And we should just be willing to share whatever comes about in our reality. And so today, what we want to focus on is this simple idea that's in white right there, good deeds. We want to think about and to really dive into what does it mean for us to leverage our good deeds. Because ultimately, we believe that everyone matters to God, that every single person matters to God, that there is no qualifications. But that's something that pretty much everybody in our culture agrees upon. I mean, we believe that there's this general idea that if there is a God in this world, that people should matter to that God. In fact, you've probably had conversations with people that have checked out of church, have checked out of religion, and the reason that they did so was because they realized or they came to a conclusion that bad things have happened to good people, so therefore there must not be a God, because obviously if there was a God, that God would not allow those things to happen to good people. But this simple idea, that everybody matters to God, this isn't something that has been carrying on from generation to generation. In fact, there was no ancient value in this. When Jesus walked into the face of this earth, when Jesus came down and became one of us, he walked into a culture where people had a polytheistic reality. They believed in many, many gods. In fact, because they believed in many, many gods, here's something that they would do is they would regularly offer sacrifices because they believed that the gods were just up in the sky and could care less about people. And so they would offer sacrifices on behalf of, maybe they were going to war in a couple weeks, so they would want to make sure that the God of war, that the gods were on their side. And so they would offer sacrifices that, hey, maybe God will have favor on us, or maybe they needed rain, so they would go and offer a sacrifice. They would do anything and everything they can to try to get the gods to have favor upon them. And for many of them, they would actually begin to believe that personal sacrifice, that sacrificing a child, sacrificing a firstborn would be a very valuable thing to be able to warrant the favor of God. And we look at that and we think about that and we scoff, like, how could anybody even do that? But that was the culture of a polytheistic reality. Beyond that, in ancient times, it wasn't just this idea that people were not valued, but in ancient times, one of the things that wasn't just practiced, it was assumed, was slavery. Slavery wasn't merely practiced in ancient times, it was assumed. I mean, there was this idea that every single person that walked the face of the earth was one string of bad luck away from, one bad decision away from being put into slavery. For many people, if a neighboring community were to come in and just wreak havoc, they would oftentimes plunder the goods and take the people, and the people would become their servants. If you had a debt that needed to be owed and you couldn't pay it, there was a good chance that you were going to end up a servant or a slave to the person you were indebted to. There was this idea that people had no value, that people weren't valued, they weren't esteemed, they weren't brought on high. They were just a commodity. And if I have goods, I might be able to have people too. And if I don't have goods, I better make sure that I'm doing okay. You see, in this culture, compassion was considered weakness. Compassion was considered, you're compassionate? How dare you? If you're compassionate, guess what? You're going to get run over. There's no way that you could possibly be able to withstand the rigors of the mighty army that could be coming in. You can't be compassionate. You've got to rise up above that. And this is what Jesus walked into. Jesus walked into a world where people weren't valued, where nobody mattered, where your goods, your services, what you offered to society, the name that you had, the stash that you gathered was more valuable than the people that you lived next to, even the family that you lived in. And Jesus walks into this world. And he begins saying these outlandish things like, blessed are the meek. In that culture, meek was weak. And Jesus is like, no, meek is not weak. Meek is not weak. Meek is something to be aspired to. Jesus walked in where compassion is considered weakness. And Jesus is like, no, compassion is not a weakness. Compassion is a strength. And the reason compassion is a value is because when you show compassion, you are showing compassion upon somebody that I love. You want to know what it looks like to show compassion, to be like God? Well, follow me. And Jesus began to treat people as if everybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of the stuff that you have, regardless of who you lived, that everybody was created in the image of God. And if everybody was created in the image of God, then everybody matters. And so every once in a while, we believe that we should just come together, rally around this idea, and corporately remind ourselves so that we can remind our community that everybody matters to God. That if we want to love God, the best way we can love God is to love the people that God loves. That if we want to honor God, the best way we can honor God is by honoring the people who God has put value in. And so Jesus would continually change the paradigm of what these people were living in. He would constantly be changing what's happening and in the process raising the dignity and the value of humanity everywhere. You've heard it said, if you're a woman, being a follower of Jesus should be a given because there's nobody that raised the dignity and the value of women like Jesus did, especially in that culture. And what we're talking about today, it is uniquely Christian. This idea of loving with no strings attached, it's uniquely Christian. It was never practiced in any other religion, in any other group. I mean, you can look at other third world countries and you can begin to see that what we're talking about doesn't come naturally. So Jesus, we're going to look at a sermon that he gave, one of the most famous sermons he gave. He's standing on a mountain and he proclaims this incredible message, and it was eye-opening. In fact, it stunned many of those people that were following him. And in Matthew chapter 5, we pick up in verse 42, Jesus says, and he's bringing them in, he's pulling them in, and he says this. He says, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. To which we're looking at it, we're saying, but wait a second. You want me to give to the person who asks of me, but what if they can't pay me back? Am I still supposed to give it to them? What if they take advantage of... What if I show compassion to them and they take advantage of the compassion that I want to share with them? Then what do I do? And Jesus is like, well, give to the one who asks you and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. But wait a second, Jesus. This is not normal. He's like, I know. We're not wanting to start an average movement. We're wanting to change the world. And in order for us to change the world, it means we need to change the way we see our reality. So let's keep going. And he continues on. He says in Matthew 5:44, you've heard that it was said, which basically means that this is something that the individuals of the day, they had heard. This was a teaching that was going on in the synagogues, in the religious sectors. This is things that these people were hearing regularly from a religious perspective. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Which we scoff at that. We're like, we would never do that. But I bet there's some people that you could maybe not hate, but you'd like to do without. There's that person in your work that you're like, I hope they get fired tomorrow. Maybe that's not you. I mean, it's not me. Doyle, you're safe, I think. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And Jesus is talking into a culture where a lot of the religious leaders of that day, they had gathered information, not just from the Jewish scriptures. This is not written in the Jewish scriptures, but they'd gathered information from the Jewish scriptures as well as just from ancient teachings and practices among the Jewish people. And they had kind of come up with this reality that sounded good to them, that we need to love our neighbor, but the enemies that come to attack us, we need to be ready. Those that are trying to take part in our demise, we need to hate them and we need to scoff. We need to be angry at them. And so this idea of loving your neighbor and hating your enemy was something that was propagated and something that in that day and age was common. Because what we want to love our neighbor, we want to love the people that are like us, but there's those people that are different than us. What do we do about that? And he goes on, he says, good question, I'm glad you asked, but I tell you, I want you to love your enemies, and I want you to pray for those who persecute you. Wait, who does that? I mean, can I just ask you a question? I mean, who in here has prayed for those who persecute you? I don't know what persecution looks like for you, but maybe this is just really elementary, right? You're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off. They're your enemy, right? You're not praying for them. Well, let me rephrase that. You're not praying that they get there safely, right? You're praying that just on the other side of that hill are those cops and they're ready to pull them over, right? I mean, pray for those who persecute you. That's not normal. I mean, if I were to ask you, and let's just be real simple here, and this is not to be guilt-ridden because this is right back at me, but especially if you're a follower of Jesus, not just do you pray for those who persecute you, but let me ask you this, who do you pray for, period? What if your prayers were answered over the last year? Every prayer you prayed. Who would get the benefit of your prayers? Probably the majority of us would maybe stay within our family, and maybe that one individual we know at work who's having a really, really rough time, and we're just kind of throwing them the token prayer just because we hope that, we're tired of them complaining every single Monday, just please give them favor, God. I'm tired of their complaints. But how many of us really, if we think about our prayer life, how many of us really get out beyond just the simple 4, 5, 6 people that we live with and that are around us on a regular basis? And Jesus is assuming that that is a common reality. Jesus is assuming that you're praying for those people. And he's saying, and when you're praying, here's what else I want you to pray for. I want you to pray for those who persecute you. I want you to pray for those who get your blood boiling. I want you to begin the process when you see somebody, when somebody gets on your nerves, I want you to begin praying for them. Now, why would he want us to pray for them? What do you think Jesus is, what's this prayer supposed to be like? Number one, you're probably thinking, Scott, no, you're a pastor and that's great. I think you only work one day a week, so that's neither here nor there. You don't live in the real world. It's not easy to do this. And so this isn't me trying to encourage you. This is something that Jesus is encouraging us collectively to do. But what do you think that this prayer is all about? What do you think he's wanting them to pray for? I mean, it's probably one of two things. He's probably either sitting there saying, oh, are you kidding me? I don't want to pray for that. And you just put in okay, God, just be with them, but not really be with them, but not really be with them, but not really be with them. Please, God, just maybe find favor on them. Maybe don't let them get a flat tire today, but don't let them get that good parking spot, right? Or maybe the prayer is that, oh God, could you smite them? Maybe that's the prayer. But really, what would it look like if we just for a month, we chose to pray for our enemies? And I don't know who that is that persecutes you, and I don't know what persecution looks like for you. It might be you're a teenager and you're sitting here and say, I know what persecution looks like, my mom and dad. Maybe for you, that persecution looks like the neighbor who's constantly turning in the HOA reports on your yard, and you're sitting there thinking, it's not that high. Maybe for you, the persecution comes in the form of a debt collector. Maybe it comes in the form of the boss. Maybe for you, persecution comes in the form of your kids. I don't know what persecution looks like for you. But here's what I know, and this is why Jesus is pointing us to this. He's saying, pray for those who persecute you, that if we just stopped and tried to do that just for a month, if we just, when things began rolling in our head and we're like, oh man, I can't stand, and we begin to say, okay, God, I just want to pray. God, I'm going to ask that you bless them today. God, I don't know where they're at. I don't know what they're doing, but God, if you would find favor in their life today, just please help them, whatever they're doing. Two things happen. The first thing is this, is the way you think about that person begins to change. They no longer become enemies, and you begin to look a little bit more kindly upon them, to which you're saying, now wait a second, Scott, this is a mean trick. I love hating them. I revel in the fact that I get to hate them. The second thing is this, and this is something Jesus pulls out, and as he's talking about it, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why might he say that? And he goes on, that you may look like children of your Father in heaven. That as you pray for those who persecute you, that you may look like your Father who's in heaven, that you may look like God. To which Jesus was constantly saying, you want to see what God looks like? You need to look at me. You want to know what God looks like? Well, guess what? I have come and I am the embodiment of who God is, of who your heavenly Father is. When you have seen me, you have seen your Father in heaven, he would say. That you may be children of your Father in heaven. Really? And Jesus continues on. He's like, let me give you an illustration. Pray for those who persecute you. I get that. He continues on. He says, he causes the sun to rise on the evil and on the good. And he sends the rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. In that day, the idea is that, well, God obviously is going to send favor on the people that he likes. But Jesus is changing the paradigm. And he's saying, no, listen, God's going to send the sun to rise on the evil and the good. It's going to happen both ways. God's going to send the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. It's going to happen both ways. And so what I want you to do is if you want to look like your Father in heaven, if you want to look like Jesus who gave himself for you, the best thing we can do is not play favorites, but we can begin to say, you know what, regardless of whether it's evil or good, regardless of righteous or unrighteous, God is going to do the same thing for everybody, whether they're on his team or not, whether God matters to them or not. And Jesus continues, and he says this, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? In other words, if you love those who love you, if you only treat the people that are like you, if you only treat the people that look like you, that have the same kind of career path as you, if you only treat and love the people that look like you, that smell like you, that act like you, that do the things you do, don't even the tax collectors do that? In other words, maybe it's not the tax collectors. I mean, we're thinking like the IRS. I mean, I don't know if that's a good people or not. Like, I don't exactly know where to stand on that. Like, I think they're good. They give me tax breaks, but then they keep wanting more money. Like, I just don't get them. I mean, let's don't think tax collectors for a second. Let's input the worst possible group you could imagine. And it probably is different for everybody. Right? You probably, when we think about who are the worst people in your life, you probably immediately have somebody that pops in the back of your mind. If not, you're better than me, and here's the microphone. But when we think about this, when we think about that group of people that just always gets under our nerves, that group of people that we're constantly thinking, oh man, life would be better if. Jesus is saying, if you only love those who love you, what reward will you get? Don't even those people do that? I mean, that group of people that you've chosen to try to push away from, they love each other in the same way that you love the people you love. And he goes on and he says this in 47, and if you greet only your own people, I tend to be I can be much for some people. Like, I walk in a room, I realize that about myself. I realize about my tendency, like, I like to talk to people. I like to look at name tags of the cashiers and call them by name and just to watch the face. Like, they're either like, how did you know my name? Right? I mean, there's something, read your name tag. Genius. Anyway, I don't say that, right? There you go, right? Like, I tend to greet only the people, like, I have that flaw in me where I'm thinking, like, I walk into a room and there is a little bit of a not forward side of me that just likes to be a chameleon on the side of a wall. And if I walk into a room where I don't know people or people don't seem to be like me, I tend to just kind of be a wallflower and just observe and think they don't want me. They don't care what I have to offer. They don't really want to be friends with me. And Matthew's pointing that out. Jesus is talking about, if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? You see, what Jesus is asking us to do is something that's uniquely Christian. What Jesus is asking us to do is something that is unique to being a follower of Jesus. It is to love those who maybe you would deem unlovable. To love those who are different than you, who are not quite like you, who you would look at them and say, oh, are you kidding me? Like, you can't cut me off again. Are you kidding me? I've got to work in the cubicle by that person? You see, following Jesus means we need to be looking more and more like Jesus with every single day. The implication is this, is for us, for you and I, we need to be looking and thinking about how can we do more? You see, even the pagans, they do this. They greet the people that they love, even the people that are the worst possible category according to you. I'm not putting any names in that. Even those people, they do this. And Jesus is saying, as a follower of Jesus, our implication, our drive, our desire is to do more than that. To do more than what others do. And ultimately, as we give of ourselves, we should strive, and I know this is weird, we should strive to get noticed for doing good. We should strive to get noticed by others, of loving others, of showcasing how we're putting our needs in front of them. In fact, Jesus says, if you do this, then you're perfect. And he continues on and he says this, be perfect, therefore. If you want to know what to be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. I mean, this is what Jesus is saying. You want to know what it means to be perfect? To love those who are not like you, who maybe will never love you, who cannot love you, to love those who frustrate you. And Jesus says, this is what it looks like to be perfect. To which the Jewish leaders of that day are like, no, I don't know. That's not perfect. I'll tell you what perfect is. Perfect is when you are morally upright. There's like 400 and 1,000 commandments in the Jewish scriptures. If you want to be perfect, you need to uphold all of those scriptures and not delete one. To the Jewish leaders of that day, perfection was about being sinless. And Jesus came and said, if you can do this, not if you can be perfect, not if you just obey all the laws in the Jewish scriptures. Jesus says, if you can just do more than what the pagans do, you will be perfect. Therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. You see, perfection was not about sinning less. Perfection was not about doing better. Perfection was about loving those who maybe you will never receive love from. In fact, I would define perfection as this. It is doing good for those who cannot or will not do good for you. What does perfection look like in the eyes of Jesus? It's doing good for those who cannot or will not do good for you. That's hard. If I can be honest, that's not an easy thing to live out. But ultimately, what Jesus is saying is this is what it looks like to be God-like. I don't know about you, when I was growing up, I remember the phrase, oh, they're so godly. Maybe for me, like growing up, I was always this negative connotation. Because what I associate godly is boring. Like you're growing up as a teenager and they're like, oh, they're so godly. And you're like, I see them at school. They're godly. That's not godly. That's boring. Like, I don't want that lifestyle, right? Like, oh, they pray so valid. Like their prayers are just so incredible. They're so long. I'm like, I know they put me to sleep. Like, what is wrong? I know you're thinking, what kind of pastor is this? But really, there's this idea in our culture today that godliness is all about vertical realities. It's all about, if I pray longer prayers, God will love me more. If I can just read more and more and more of the Bible, then God will love me more and more and more and more. And don't get me wrong, the Bible, reading the scriptures can help us realize who God is. But if we're reading the scriptures to try to make God happy with us, that's not godliness. That's education. That's school. But what Jesus is telling us is if you want to be like God, then this is what you need to do. And why do I say this is what you need to do? Because Jesus embodied it. He said, you've seen the Father if you've seen me. And then Jesus went on and said, doing good for those who cannot or will not do good for you is what it looks like to be perfect. And then Jesus went and modeled it. I mean, you look at his life. He went and he found Matthew, who was a tax collector. And he said, hey, you know what? I realize that the world thinks less of you, and I realize that really I'm going to use you in illustrations from this point forward, but I really want to hang out with you. Can I come to your house, and can we have a party? Matthew's like, sure. And all the other 11 are like, we're going to Matthew. Like, do you realize what that means to our careers? Like, if we go to the tax collector's house, the community will hate us. That's okay. Let's go. I mean, Jesus would look at a Roman centurion who, the Romans were the individuals who would crucify Jesus eventually. And I know Jesus knew that this is an individual that would embody his end game. And the Roman centurion came up to him and said, hey, I've got a servant who needs you. And Jesus didn't say, well, you're going to kill me one day. You need to turn around and go on. Jesus looked at him and he healed the servant. I mean, Jesus looked at a Samaritan woman who was in the middle of the day at the water well, and he walks up to her and he carries on a conversation with her. He wasn't supposed to hang out with women, nor was he supposed to hang out with Samaritans. And Jesus didn't care about that. He realized that there's nothing she can do for him. There's nothing she can bring value. That I just want to have a relationship with her, and I want to encourage her. I want to do good for her, even though she cannot and probably will not ever do good for me. And he did so. And the 12 come back and they're like, what are you doing talking to her? And Jesus is like, it's okay. In fact, the Samaritan ran off to her community and tells everybody about the fact that there's an individual who knew me inside and out and still loved me. You see, Jesus went throughout his life loving people who he knew would never be able to love him back. In fact, it didn't end with his life. It ended with him giving his life for us. I mean, he realized that he realized that there is nothing we can ever do to repay our sin. There's nothing we can do to make right what we've done wrong. And so Jesus stepped into the gap and he gave his life for us, knowing that there is nothing we can do or there's nothing we will ever be able to do that is good enough to make up for what Jesus did for us. So, this is what perfection looks like. It's when we choose to do good for those who cannot or will not do good for you. And here's what I know is if we do this, we may be criticized for what we believe, but we should be famous for the way we treat people. And we may be criticized for what we believe. Can you believe those Christians? They believe somebody came back from the dead. They are so crazy. I mean, they take this ancient text, they call it the Bible, they say it's the truth, but I don't get it. They read this Bible and it seems to tell them things, and I don't understand. How do they read this book? They are so crazy, but you know what? The way they treat me, there's something about that. I don't believe everything that they believe, but I'm going to tell you something. I want to hire one of them because I know that they are going to do the very best job they can ever do. I might not believe everything that they do, but I hope one day I work for one. I hope one day my child marries one. I hope that they move next door to me so that we can have good conversations and that I know they are going to bring my home value up through the roof because they are so good at making their house a good, safe haven. This is the kind of neighbor I want. I might not believe what they believe, but wow, the way they treat me is phenomenal. It's as if the more I mistreat these followers of Jesus, the better they treat me. That's what Jesus embodied. That's what Jesus came to do. And it's unfortunate because if I were to be honest, the reputation that Christians have in our culture today, we are more known for this, and we are infamous for the way we treat people. And the way we treat people today tends to be something that we need to get on a soapbox and apologize and say, I'm sorry. The way we treat people tends to be one in which we need to encourage and we need to say, God, forgive us. We have only loved those who are like us, and we've chosen to hurt. We've chosen to be vicious towards. We've chosen to leverage our book in such a way to give us justifications for how we treat people. Not to make us famous for how we treat people. And in this, Jesus said, hey, I want you to follow me. Yeah, it's going to be messy. But this isn't an average movement. This isn't an average opportunity. This isn't for the average individual. And here's why. Because what we're going to do is going to rock the world. And it did. It changed the world. The way people loved Jesus absolutely changed the world. It floors me. It wasn't his teaching. It was the way his people loved those around him. And I believe that this can be our reality too. That we might be criticized for what we believe, and that's okay, but we should be famous for the way we treat people, and this is why we do Be Rich. And this is why specifically we're jumping into our serve opportunity. Because corporately, what I believe is if everybody matters to God, then everybody should matter to us. And regardless of what they can do in return, we should offer ourselves as an opportunity to serve, to leverage who we are for the benefit of others, regardless of what they can do on our behalf. And so for us, this is our serve week. This is our opportunity to leverage our talents in such a way to make much of those around us. And like I've said last week, we've got two great nonprofit organizations, the Community Storehouse and I Can Still Shine. And I want to thank you so much. Those organizations are doing incredible things we as a church can never do. They are making a difference and bringing value and redemption and life to people in our community, and it is incredible. So we have an opportunity before us. Not this coming Saturday, but the next Saturday. It's actually Saturday, November 23rd. We're having a serve day with Community Storehouse, where we're taking over Community Storehouse. They're allowing us to come in, and they've got a bunch of tasks for us. I mean, they're excited and ready. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to go in and we're going to help them in their retail shop. We're going to help them in their food pantry. We're going to help them as they're putting bags together. I mean, a lot of what you see here, these birthday party bags that we've got, we want to go and be a benefit for the community, because Community Storehouse is doing a remarkable job at championing families in our community who are living less than paycheck to paycheck, whose kids oftentimes don't have the means to have food when they leave school on Friday until they come back on Monday. And they are the bridge that's helping families across our community to have value and dignity. So if they're doing such a good job, would you join us in helping them expand their ministry and make much of the people in our community? I want to thank you so much. The reason we do Be Rich is because no strings attached generosity truly changed the world one day. And I just believe it can change the world again. Let's pray. God, we love you, and we thank you so much for the fact that you are a big God. And God, I know me personally, there are so many times where, God, I let what is natural reign supreme. And there's so many times that I let my own personality dictate and drive the conversations, or my ability to be a wallflower at times, believe it or not, to drive the way I love our community. And God, I pray that it would be a driving point for us, that regardless of what people can do in response to us, may we be willing to do whatever it takes to look like you. We love you. We thank you. And we need you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.